All right, in this video, I'm going to go over two skills, trig equation from a graph and trig graphs match multiple choice. So I'll do trig equation from a graph first. And this one, we're going to actually have to write it. And we're going to have to know if it's sine, cosine. We're going to have to know what the min, max, the midline, the amplitude, and the period are to be able to calculate all that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to identify if the graph represents sine or cosine. So on this problem here, because it starts at the max, remember cosine starts at max or min. And the sine starts at the midline. Now, if it's negative, it's going to start at the min for cosine. If it's positive, it's going to start at the max. If it's negative at the front, then sine is going to go down first instead of up first. So let's look at this particular problem. This particular problem, I want to look for the midline first. So it's going to have a midline of 4. I also want to look at, does it start at the max or the midline? And it looks like it starts at the max. So it's going to be a cosine. So starts at max. Let me draw this out real quick. 5 to 3. So it starts at the max, and it's a cosine, and it has a midline of 4. And it has a minimum of 3. So it's cosine. I don't know the x part yet, but I know at the very end, since the midline is at 4, it's going to be plus 4. Does that make sense there? Now that number here, that vertical distance between the midline and the max, that's the amplitude. It's just going to be 1 because it's only going up to 5. So we have the midline, we have the amplitude. We just got to figure out the b value. Remember, the b value is 2 pi divided by the period. So if we can get the period, we can do 2 pi divided by that and figure out what that number is next to the x. So let's look closely at that graph and let's see if we can figure out what the period is. Okay, it starts at 5, goes back down. Remember, if it's cosine, wherever it starts over again at that max is going to represent the x value for your period. So down here, that period is 6 pi. So let me go back to my paper and we'll work that out. So the period is 6 pi. And we want to do 2 pi divided by 6 pi. Well, in this case, you have 2 pi's that can cancel out. So 2 divided by 6 can reduce, and that reduces to 1 out of 3. So it should be 1/3 in there. Now you also, because we're writing a function, we want to have y equals. Don't forget the y equals when you're putting these in. So these are the numbers you want to put, just like this. Y equals 1, cosine parentheses 1/3x, close parentheses, plus 4. Let's see if that works. Y equals 1 cosine 1 divided by 3, right arrow, x, close parentheses, plus 4. And green check means it's good. It goes you what the cycle is, the amplitude being 1, midline is 4. It talks about frequency. That's actually not right. Frequency is not just that b value, but I'm going to ignore that for now. So we don't need the 1 there. As you can see, the answer doesn't have the 1, but putting it there will not hurt it. All right, let's do another one. We'll probably do 2 or 3 here. Okay, and this problem here looks like it starts at the maximum again, so it's going to be cosine. It's got a midline of 1, and it goes up 2. So its amplitude is going to be 2, midline is at 1. Oh, and it's cosine because it starts at the max. So its amplitude is 2, midline is 1. So it's going to be y equals 2 cosine something times x plus 1. I know that much. Now let's figure out the b value. 2 pi divided by the period. So let's go and find that period. It starts here, goes down, back up to here. Period is 2 pi. So the b value is 2 pi divided by 2 pi. Well, that all cancels out. So it's going to be 1. So we want to put in y equals 2 cosine 1x. Do we need the 1? No. Plus 1. Let's check it out. And again, with these ones, when it's being multiplied, we don't need the 1 there for the x, or if there was a 1 there. We do need the plus 1 at the end, though, because it is being shifted up. All right, we're gonna end this skill on this problem, and then we'll do the multiple choice section too. Let's look at this graph here. So look at where it starts. Does it start at the min or the max or the midline? Looks like it starts at 4. That's the midline. Goes up to 5. So if it starts at the midline, it's going to be sine. And that midline is 4. It only goes up to 5, so its amplitude is going to be 1. So it's going to be y equals 1 sine something x plus 4. So what's going to be that number with the x? Let's look at the period. So at the midline, it goes up, back down, down, back up, and it ends right here at the midline again, and that's going to be at 2 pi. So period is 2 pi, b is 2 pi over the period. 2 pi divided by 2 pi is equal to 1. So 1 sine 1x plus 4. Now if you're typing this up without the 1s, you would just write sine x plus 4. You don't really need the 1s if they're here. You do need it if it's there, but not here. So let's put that in. Sine x, y equals. Always put your y equals on these. Sine x plus 4. All right. So let's look at a different skill. Kind of similar, but more multiple choice here. So it's trig graphs for multiple choice. All right, in this problem here, we want to identify what the trig graph is from the given graph. And there's some multiple choice answers, but I'm going to kind of treat it like the last problem and write out my equation first, and then we'll see if we can match it up with one of the answer choices. So I want to look at this graph. And it's got some big numbers here. Let's identify where it's starting. It's starting at 200. That's the midline. So it's going to be a sine. So midline starts at 200, goes up to 450. So that's an important number. And it goes down to, looks like negative 50. And then it ends at the x value of 800. So I jotted all this down. What you want to do on these problems is you want to make a sketch of this if you can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but get these key features. Get the midline, the max and the min, and the period. Okay, that's the x value here. You can get those, you can pretty much write all that stuff. So it's a sine because it starts at the midline, and it's going to have a midline of 200. So it's going to be sine, remember, y equals a sine bx plus c. C is going to be 200. So we got that number. Now the a is the amplitude, so it's going to go from 200 to 450. That a value is going to be that difference of 450 minus 200. And 400 minus 200 is 200, so 450 minus 200 is 250. So that a value should be 250. And just to kind of reiterate, the midline plus the amplitude is the max. The midline minus the amplitude is the min. It does go down to negative 50. So that b value, remember the period is 800. So b is 2 pi divided by the period. And since the period is 800, it's 2 pi divided by 800. Now, 2 pi divided by 800 is a small number. 2 times pi is only 6 point something. But we want to leave the pi in, and we just want to reduce the 2 out of 800. So these can both be divided by 2. So it's going to be 1 out of 400 pi, or we would just write pi over 400 for your b value. So your final equation should look like 250 sine pi over 400x plus 200. So that's what we want to look for on this problem. Let's see if we can find something that matches that or is equivalent to it. All right, so they all start with 250, end with 200. 2 of them are sine, 2 are cosine. So we want to focus on the sines. One says pi over 400, one says pi over 800. So we're going to click that one. And there we have it. And tells you which ones are wrong. That's a time suck, so we'll skip that part for now. Let's look at the next problem. We'll do maybe 3 of these as well. So I'm going to sketch this out again, see if we can figure it out. All right, can you look at this graph and tell me if it's a sine or cosine, what the period is? There's a lot going on here. There's more points than we need. And give me a second while I copy this. I know it's kind of slow for you, but I need to write this down to be able to work it out. In the meantime, think about where the midline is. Think about where the maximum is and see if you can figure out what is that amplitude, okay? All right, so all right, there's a lot to write down here. So I got it written down here now so I can annotate over it. It's not perfect, but it is the best I can do right now. So we have a midline starter. That midline is 30. It's a sine because it starts at the midline. So I know that it's going to be y equals a times sine bx plus c. I know that c is going to be 30, so y equals a times sine bx plus 30. The next thing I want to look for is the amplitude. So this distance here from 30 to 55 is 25. So my a value is going to be 25. And then finally the period. Now this one's tricky because it, gives you more than you need. If I look at this here, I only want to figure out where it stops right here. It's going to keep going. These graphs go on forever in both directions, but right here is where it kind of repeats itself. And that's going to be at 16. So the period is 16. So the b value is going to be 2 pi divided by 16. And 2 and 16 reduced to 1 out of 8. So we can say pi over 8. So we would say y equals 25 times sine pi over 8x plus 30. And let's enter that in and see what we got. 25. Now notice that some of these have negatives out front. So if it were going down first, then it would be a negative. All right, we can do one more of these maybe. I'm gonna do one that's looks a little bit different, so bear with me. Oh. I just had it too. Oh. I'm too impatient when I'm clicking through. All right, well, no, that's not the one I want either. Okay, this is the one I want. You may see the exact same problems on this for all I know. I don't know how many they have in their little bank. Let's look at this problem. So this one is going to be a little trickier because it starts at the bottom. So it goes down to -6. Goes up to +6. Its midline's at the x-axis, so that midline's going to be 0. And it counts by tens, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. All right, I got it drawn out, so let's take a look here. First thing you want to identify is it a sine or a cosine? Well, it's not starting at the midline, so it's going to be cosine. Cosine, remember, starts at the max. And it starts at the min if it's a negative at the front. So it's going to be a cosine, but because it starts at the minimum, it's going to have a negative. So the thing that when you write this, you say y equals negative because it starts at the min. Now that midline here is the x-axis. So that c value is equal to 0. So at the end, it's going to have a cosine bx plus c. Since c is 0, you don't need to write anything, but I'm going to put a 0 in there for a placeholder. Now that amplitude is, since the midline is 0 and it's going up 6, that amplitude is 6. But don't forget the negative. Now the b value here, talking about how do you get the period? Remember, the b is 2 pi divided by the period. So the period with the cosine, it's all about peak to peak, right? So it's going to start at the bottom. It's going to start over again right here. And its period matches up with the x value of 40. So 2 pi divided by 40, well, that's going to be 1 out of 20. So we would say pi divided by 20. Pi divided by 20. Now, do we need the plus 0? No. So this is really what you'd want to put in here. I don't think adding a plus 0 is going to make it wrong, but that's just extra work. Now, if this is multiple choice, remember, this is a negative and it's a cosine. And because it has a midline of 0, it's going to be there. All right, I'm going to conclude this video up. So hopefully that was enough help to get you to understand how to work through some of these modules on Delta Math. Thanks for watching.